Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Good morning, Dan from Prague.
Hi, John. Returning to the pod. I've missed a few episodes, various summer commitments and work commitments, but it's great to be back here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It was nice to have a little morning chat. Dan, how were you with grades at school?
I was a seesaw because I would do really well one year and then I'd get super lazy and I'd do really badly the next year. And it was 1, 2 the whole time. And I never put it 2 and 2 together that maybe I could just keep doing some consistent work. But that's how I was.
And so your children are both at an international school. They're getting graded already or not?
My son's getting graded. Yeah.
So today's guest, one of the things that I think all schools is this idea of assessment. And there's a lot of talk about assessment. It's one of the core businesses of a school is assessing children, how their learning is progressing. Are they meeting the standards or whatever you might have framed as your curriculum and your learning objectives? And this is a really hot topic. And there's a lot of discussion about this idea of grades. I grew up in a culture where, grades meant everything, nothing else. It was all about 4.257 and things like that. And you were measured and pretty much decided where you ended up in the different tracks of your education. And I think that's the same in most places. IB results, A levels, O levels. Were your A levels really crucial to where you ended up at university, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, when I went, I think it's still the same now. It was everything. I mean, you got points. A was so many points. B, C, D. There was no A star in those days, and it was just the number of points. Occasionally, they'd specify if you needed a science or maths or English. But yeah, that was all that mattered. And the majority of when I did A levels, the majority was on the final exam. So literally, you had 1 week that determined 18 years old. All your schooling to that point really came down to 1 week of exams, which is kind of crazy, really. Because there was some continuous assessment, but only over the last 2 years for A levels. Not like the US where you have this GPA and everything. So in the UK, it was pretty brutal when I did it.
Yeah, and believe it or not, today that's still going on, even with the IB and the AP. There's always these, that week or 2 weeks or month of all the stakes are really on that. Anyway, we are super fortunate to have Ellen Heyting, who's a passionate educator, researcher, and facilitator based at Melbourne Metrics within the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne. And it's really nice to have her. And we're going to kind of talk about this assessment. Ellen has over a decade of K-12 teaching and leadership experience in IB World Schools across Melbourne, Beijing, Singapore, and Helsinki. And she holds a PhD in education and is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. She leads projects focused on international networks and credentialing and the development of complex competencies. And Ellen is committed to empowering teachers and learners to develop the competencies that they need to thrive at a school and beyond. And today we're going to focus on Melbourne Metrics because this is an approach and a mindset that very likely many people are not familiar with, but that is super interesting. And first of all, Ellen, a warm welcome to the International School Podcast, all the way from Melbourne. We're in different time zones, the beauty of technology. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, John and Dan. It's a real pleasure to be with you tonight. Before we start, I might just also take a moment to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the beautiful Bunurong people down here in Naarm or Melbourne. And I'll take a moment to extend my respects to the elders of this land, past, present, and emerging. And I'll also extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands wherever you are and wherever any one of your listeners are coming or listening from too as well. And also, I might also extend my respects to any Indigenous educators or school leaders who might be listening. And just maybe give a quick plug for a research project and a body of work I'm involved in with the Association for International Educators and Leaders of Colour, headed up by Kevin Simpson. In that project, we're exploring how Indigenous perspectives are being embedded in international school classrooms and the experiences of international educators and leaders in international schools. So if that's you, if you're an Indigenous educator or leader working in international schools, I'd love to connect. So consider reaching out to me, either to be involved in the project or to share your story in a research capacity.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much for that reminder and highlighting that. It's much appreciated. For the audience, of course, the show notes is a place to go, and you can connect with Ellen there.
Right. I just say one thing, Ellen. It's interesting that if for anyone watching on YouTube, I know the view behind you. Actually, I played rugby for Melbourne University for a year, so I spent a year there. So I know that I've been down that very road. So
Yeah, they probably wouldn't let you on that lawn though. So it's everywhere, you know.
yeah.
Don't be on the lawn, and yeah.
So, Ellen, many of the audience may just not be familiar with Melbourne Metrics. Could you tell us what the organization is, how it connects with current conversations about AI and assessment, and why does it describe itself a bit like a weird entity in the education space? I love that term, and maybe you can elaborate.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got official clearance on that, a weird entity. But I would describe us, we are a bit weird. So, I think a lot of your guests on this podcast work for places that international educators know, like the International School of this place or that place, or, the Council of International Schools or the IB or whatever it is. But Melbourne Metrics is probably a bit of a new term to most of your listeners. So Melbourne Metrics is we're what's called a social purpose initiative that sits within the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne. So it's a real mouthful. But what it means is that we're not like a regular academic body or unit who spend most of their time in universities teaching or researching. In reality, that really means they spend most of their time grading assessments and dealing with university bureaucracy. These days, research and writing is increasingly becoming something that gets done on Sundays or in after hours. But that's a different conversation for another time. Being this funny social purpose initiative thing, or a weird entity, we're a bit different. So most people who work in universities, their success is really measured in terms of their publications and citations. That's their metric for success. I mean, thankfully for us, that's not how we're measured. We're judged on our impact. So it's the number of schools we're working with, the amount of teachers involved in our professional learning, the impact on students, engagement with the media, but maybe perhaps most importantly, it's the change to the educational landscape that's brought about through engagement with our research and tools. So, and just the other way we're a little bit different from a regular academic unit is the way we're funded. So we don't get any money from the university at all. In fact, we have to pay them quite a lot for these nice Zoom backgrounds you can see here, and the our university email addresses and all of that. But we have to be self-funded and sustainable in what we do, and we do this by working directly with educational partners. So sometimes this is individual schools, sometimes this is networks of schools, such as our new program with CIS, the New Metrics International Schools program. We work with departments of education, governments, curriculum authorities like the IB or NGOs, tertiary admissions centres, all different stakeholders in education. And I should also say here that all the work that we do in partnership. We really position teachers as experts in our work, and we draw on the incredibly deep funds of knowledge of the practitioners, so the school leaders and the educators we work with. We bring to the table maybe the assessment tools and resources, but they work with us to help them, be fit for purpose. So just a quick shout out to all of our schools and partners who work with us on this stuff.
Yeah.
Our work really stands on their shoulders. So we're so appreciative for their engagement and work. But yeah, sorry, John. Yep.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear how you're approaching this, in the sense you don't get funded by the university, you're your own entity, and you have to pay the money. And then also your measurement is very different, being in an academic environment where your papers and publications are really what people measure you by, but you're measured by how your impact is. It almost reflects a bit what you're trying to do with assessment in many ways. And I'm wondering, when you think of this idea of assessment, and Dan and I and all of us were just talking about this grading thing, what have you noticed is the challenge in shifting, from grading to capturing kind of the idea of competencies like critical thinking, collaboration, ethics, problem solving, especially as, AI begins to measure some and mirror some of the aspects of human performance. I'm wondering what are the things that you're seeing and observing in that work that you're doing, and not convincing, but supporting people to shift?
Well, I think, the first part of that question there is the fact that we need a shift, right? There's the acknowledgement there that something is fundamentally not right with the state of schooling or education at the moment. I mean, you've labelled it as grading, but I might go so far to say that we're in the middle of an assessment epidemic. You know, we did a little bit of research with some of our partner schools and found that kids in the senior years of high school were averaging around 90 summative assessments per year. And
90?
that's 90, yeah, that's about like 2 or 3 a week. So, I mean, if you want to come from, you know, IBDP psychology lens, that's like putting kids under severe, you know, psychological stress. It means the dysregulation of their HPA axis, and, you know, like it's just the type of stress where that's designed for running away from lions, you know, not for sitting, studying for exams and trying to prepare for these long-term things. It's really bad news. So I think, you know, the first part of your question is we need to start look at how can we scale that, scaling back traditional assessment. That's kind of the easier win, I think, for me, you know, and maybe that sounds weird for someone working in an assessment research centre, scaling, let's do less assessment. But we think we should be thinking about assessment in a different way and assessing maybe 1 or 2 times a year to allow space for the development of competencies, because they're really hard, complex stuff, you know. And when I say competencies, I'm talking about things like agency and learning, communication, collaboration, quality thinking, acting ethically, you know, active citizenship. Like, it's not the type of thing that you can just teach a great 40-minute lesson on and then be amazing at and do a test and see all this growth, you know. You need time to sort of sit in the mess, have a bit of a play, be really bad at it when you start, fail, but fail in a really safe psychological space so that, you know that you're not going to be judged on your initial performance, or that you know, that will haunt you in some way. You've got to have the safety to know that it's okay to play around and experiment and have a go. And then you'll get a bit of feedback, and that will generate a feedback loop from your peers or your teacher, and you'll get better and better, so that by the time maybe when you are assessed at the end of the semester or the end of the year, you will have had a chance to develop increasingly levels of expertise in that competency, and you'll be demonstrating it at, you know, at an appropriate level type of thing. So I think you know, we learn so much from when things don't work that why would we want to disincentivize students from experiencing this? So by removing that constant state of assessment, you know, we can allow kids to develop those competencies and demonstrate those higher levels. And to teachers' delight, I think this approach, it will also mean, you know, from kids, you'll never get that question again, is this formative or summative, you know? So,
or where's my grade? Did you correct my essay?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, when you talk about an assessment epidemic, that's pretty strong words when you think of it, that, you know, Dan works with thousands of schools around the world. And if you're thinking that that is, you know, propagated all over, not only international schools, but in public schools and in different contexts and different cultural settings where it might be even amplified even more, I'm wondering, is this a known thing? Is this like a term that people are using, or is this something that you have come, not you as, but the organization? Because that's, you know, an epidemic means there's a lot of negativity attached to it.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to claim that that term is out there, you know, in the ethos or used in academia. It's certainly something we talk about at Melbourne Metrics, and it's common amongst a lot of our schools, like that number. It was something between 70 and up to 100 and something.
I have so when teachers that are in an assessment environment, and especially high stakes exams, we were talking about A levels and AP and IB, and there's the Abitur, there's the BAC. There are many different ones. I'm not as familiar as other national final exams that kids have to do to get to higher education. But often for teachers, that's a measure of their success, because the more that their class gets, let's just use the IB, that's the one I'm most familiar with, 6s and 7s, or their average is 5.8, that is reflected. And you look this summer, what did all schools do? They published their IB results, right? That's an important marketing point. So how do you convince educators that have become used to this measure as validating their capacity of being a good teacher to suddenly say, guess what? We're going to do it differently, you know, how, and then how are they measured in that context that you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in there. And I think you'll notice there's a bit of a shift already from schools around this. A lot of schools that we we work with, and a lot that we don't, have stopped publishing their IB DP results. And I think that sort of speaks to this, like the harm that this sort of practice is actually doing to our young people, because it's just playing into that narrative that this one number is our sole metric of success. And I think maybe a mischaracterization of our work is that we're trying to get rid of that number, or we don't want kids to take exams, or we don't want them to know things. That's not true. That's not really what we're trying to go for at Melbourne Metrics. We just want a broadening of the gaze, or a shifting of the gaze to include more things. There are more things we can celebrate rather than just what can be captured on an exam. And that's really what we're fighting for. Sorry, Dan.
Propagated mostly by school leadership. If you look on LinkedIn, when IB results come out, every post after post is from leadership with this is our number on the IB, this is our number on the IB. And it's pushed as such a big thing by the schools themselves, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I think we just keep in our mind, what does that mean for students? 50% of those students will get below what the number published because it'll be a school average. Our school has averaged this number in the IBDP. Well, that means 50% of their students are below that number. So how would you feel, as those students or the parents of those students, and your school's just come out and said, you're pulling us down, you're pulling the average down, or we wish you'd gotten a bit higher so we could, use you as a bit of a marketing tool out there a little bit better type of thing. We're just not really comfortable with that sort of messaging. And we get the economic realities of schools, and, there is a market-driven economy and everything. But I think we just want to look at, maybe there are more types of metrics, there are more types of things, ways that kids are succeeding, that we can look at celebrating and getting out there and recognizing. So, some feedback we get from the kids who use our stuff is that, they can feel a real sense of pride in ways that maybe they haven't been celebrated or recognized in schools before. They feel really seen by our assessments and our reports, that this is a good representation of me as a learner, or what I know and can do, and things that they're really happy to go home and talk with their parents about, their competencies and things they can put on the fridge and be proud of, and that type of thing. So it's just it's not, we don't want to get rid of that number from the IB necessarily, but we just want to broaden the ways that we can talk about that kids can succeed.
What does it look like in the classroom? Let's just say middle school, or even, because primary schools and elementary often are not as grade centric. But what does it look like in the classroom? You're saying, they feel like they're seen. So when they do the exam, they're not seen because it's a number. You basically have a cold number, and that's what you're associated with. What is it that you're doing that's having kids say that? What are some of the mechanics or actual, work that's happening in a classroom context?
All right. So I think, right now, if you look at any senior secondary curriculum, again, like you, I think I'm from the IB world, so I'm just going to use IB as an example. I'm not trying to put it out there as any better or worse than any other curriculum, but it's what we know, So if I look at, let's say IB DP physics, we've got this real just in case approach to education. Like, you've got to learn all this stuff in the syllabus just in case you ever want to do a PhD in physics, even though a very small proportion of kids who do IB physics will actually go on to do a PhD in it. So what we're sort of advocating for is that if we can, remove a little bit of that content, remove a little bit of that assessing for grades or content knowledge, maybe we could fill the vacuum, from a teaching and learning perspective, with more of a just-in-case approach. So we'd like to see more of a, or just-in-time approach, So why not present kids with a real interesting real-world scenario and help them develop the agency in their learning to think about that question, and or what questions they want to answer about that real-world scenario, and what they need to know to figure that out. Like I don't know, let's use the physics line as an example, and I'm a psychology teacher, so I've never studied physics beyond like general science in year 10. But, within areas I'm interested in, I have tons of physics-related questions. Like I live near the biggest container port in Australia, so I have so many physics-related questions about how that operates. Like, I want to know, why do these absolutely huge ships not fall down? How deep does the water have to be? Why do some of the ships need tugboats and some don't? How does that piece of rope hold that huge ship to the dock? You know, why are the ships the size they are and not 10 times bigger or 10 times smaller? So there's like maths in there and limits theory, and why the majority of the maritime workers who go to my local shops on these ships Filipino, and why are all the flags of the flag of Belize? You know, there's so many questions that would benefit from a global politics perspective. Why are things so much more expensive these days? Is it because the Houthi rebels are blocking the Suez Canal? You know, and what's a Houthi rebel? And what's the Suez Canal? You know, like we need the history teachers involved. You know, we haven't even touched on the economics of, you know, how the container shipping drives the whole global economy. Like, I want to know why every school, high school and primary school in my area, is not doing like at least a term project on the port. You know, there's pretty much a connection any kid could make in any subject to something like that. So I think if we could create the time, you know, time and space, and free up and give teachers agency too, to lean into these more sort of open-ended things, we could change some of these conversations.
So do you have a framework and structure? So if I'm a school that becomes a partner in this journey, do you provide them actual structures, professional development training, how to set up the coursework and kind of the objectives and the outcomes? Is it that granular?
Oh, so look, my boss, Professor Sandra Milligan, she has this saying that she hammers into us, and she says, Ellen, we are assessment nerds. We need to stick to our knitting. So we sort of see our role as providing the assessment tools and resources, and then we never dictate to schools about, you know, this is how you do it, this is how you do the teaching and learning. But it's why we really like working with networks of schools, and we convene groups of schools like the New Metrics International School Program with our group of CIS schools, is because what we find is the best way to sort out what does this mean for teaching and learning in a classroom is to get together really great teachers, really great educational leaders who are on the chalk face doing this work in schools with teachers to say, hey, you know, what do we do about those physics teachers? How can we get them on board? Or what is the deal with grade 9s? You know, why can't we do this here? Or how do we bring this and use this alongside the PYP exhibition, you know, or how do we use this in this context type of thing? And they sort of figure it all out together. So we try to stay away from dictating this is the approach. We've got tools and resources to sort of help along the way. And we definitely, you know, do some work in professional learning and do some consultancy and those type of things. But again, we like to do it really in partnership with schools and try to stay away from a sort of one size fits all.
Yeah.
Because what it's going to look like, you know, in an IB school in Prague is going to be very different from a national curriculum school in Melbourne.
So Dan had alluded to these different East Asian countries with their, you know, exam-driven cultures. How do you, when you are interacting with different geographic areas and different cultural contexts, so not all schools, there are IB schools that are not all Anglophone-centric. There are a lot of different schools all over the world, international schools that are maybe not Western-centric. How do you kind of engage in shifting some of those conversations, maybe in environments where exams are so high stakes and it's ingrained in the culture, not only in the school, but in the home setting?
Yeah, and I think I should definitely acknowledge that the international school world is new for us at Melbourne Metrics. I'm the anomaly in the team with you know, having worked in international schools for a while before joining the team. We're about 2 years into a partnership with CIS, and sort of we're learning a great deal from them as that evolves. And we hope we're bringing some things to the table as well. So I'll acknowledge that at the start. But I think the other thing I would say is that we haven't really found that there has been a cultural difference. And what I mean by that is that Australia is really exam driven and focused and on that stuff too. And I imagine a lot of these other jurisdictions are as well. I think maybe it's the stereotype that some of the Asian cultures are, but I believe it's a bit more widespread. And I think that's the case because, you know, people value what we measure. And all we've ever been measuring in education is that one number at the end of grade 12. And if that's the only thing you give people that you're measuring, that's all they're going to talk about or value or you know, what else do you talk about at the dinner time conversation or in the media, unless, you know, you've got this one this one measure type of thing. So I would say yes, we see it in Asian schools, sure, but it's beyond that. It's within our at the wider culture. But
I would push back about it. I think Australia. I would love to see the statistics by country, because I would think Australia would be less stress and pressure on exams than say South Korea, where there's a specific final leaving exam that dictates if you can get into one of the big companies or not. Is there any research on that by country? Because I'd be keen to see what the European come, because there's big differences in Europe between some of the Southern European countries and Nordics and everything. I'd be curious, how is there any research being done on that?
Oh, look, I'm sure there is. Not ours, and say, and fair enough. I'll cut Europe some slack there. I did work in Finland for 4 years, so yes, there maybe wasn't the same focus on high stress exams in Finland.
It's consistently ranked, along with Singapore, like one of the best education systems in the world. I mean, obviously, it's subjective how you rank that,
But I would say, if I can interject here, is that in certain parts of Europe, like I'm based in Switzerland, it is an exam-driven culture, and kids get decided if they're going to do an apprenticeship or they're going to go to higher education. I remember when I was 11, it was pretty much decided where I was heading by what of the tracks I fell into based on my exam capacity. And guess what? It's still going on.
It's interesting. Czech Republic, it's similar. It's a younger one as well. They have a lot of trade schools. They have gymnasiums. They have different categories of schools, and you have to make exactly 11, 12 kids are making decisions based on which are going to affect their career at that point.
Yeah, and look, Finland is the same. I think the difference in Finland is that there's just not as much status or something, between the difference between if you do a trade or you do go on to more academic pathways, because a doctor and a plumber get paid about the same, or much more favorably in other places. So there's no societal sort of stigma around different pathways. Just in the Australian context, a lot of we call them leafy green schools, but sort of, I guess, more privileged, more heavily resourced sort of schools that come to work with us. They come motivated by this sort of stress and culture that have somehow taken hold of their schools. And they tell us that between 30 and 40% of their young people are reporting clinical levels of anxiety in the senior secondary years. One school told us that, it's not IBDP here, but, senior secondary exam time, they literally ran out of rooms for kids to take their exams in special consideration, in a room by themselves. They had to kick the grade 7 maths classes out of the maths rooms so that kids could take their exams. If that's not assessment wagging the dog of education, an example of that, I don't know what is. And I'm all for maths classes getting outside more often, but, it shouldn't be for that reason, because the exams just ran out of room. So I think we feel it everywhere.
You talk a lot about this idea of well-being and psychological safety in the context of assessment. And it's interesting because often I don't think that comes up. We don't, we always say, oh, the IB is stressful. And I know both my children went through the IB. They had very different attitudes. One was like, whatever. And the other one was, flashcards till the very last minute. And I think it's really hard for these kids, but how often, it's not like we have psychologists and counselors in a room to help them manage that. Why is there not a more awareness? Or there is, but it's not acted upon.
Yeah, and I think it's growing. I think educational psychologists and probably school counsellors have been advocating for this type of shift for a really long time. Like, we're really lucky at the University of Melbourne to draw on the Centre of Wellbeing Science within our Faculty of Education, which is a research centre investigating exactly this issue. We have this current 20th century model of school system that is like hog-tying school leaders and trying to control our teachers and literally making our young people sick. We have such high rates of mental health issues and school refusal and people, a teaching crisis. And I know it's not quite the same in international schools, but it's hitting there too. We just can't get people to stay in schools at the moment. And I think people want to blame COVID, but it's not quite just COVID, People have gone back to cafes and restaurants and movie theatres, but they haven't quite rushed back into schools at the same way. And, we're seeing the rise of alternative education providers like virtual schools and hybrid schools and homeschoolers, absolutely booming. So I think our work maybe speaks to it in that, at the centre of maybe our favorite graphic or our favorite slide, we have the word thrive. And we draw really on Ryan and Desi's model of their self-determination theory when we're defining what we mean by thriving. So, their model states that to thrive, humans need a sense of connectedness or belonging, like we're talking about. They need a sense of autonomy or agency, and they need to experience a sense of competence within a domain of their interest. So you can see, why we really love that work. But it also speaks to the fact that our model of assessment really it lives and dies on the quality of the relationship in schools. So that the not only adult to adult or student to student, but also teacher to student, there has to be mutually respectful relationships and learning partnerships. Otherwise, our tools are just not set up to capture transactional or surface level learning experiences.
Do you support also the primary elementary context, or is it more in a secondary context that you're doing this?
Yeah, so I think I probably jumped the gun a bit and not actually talked much about the the mechanics of how our assessments work. So our tools have a K through 12 line of sight. So they can be worked all the way from early years classrooms. We have a set of tools, for those contexts, all the way through up to senior secondary. And how they work, they're not like, it's not a kid doesn't sit down to do a test or a project or anything like that. They're teacher facing. So teachers log on to our assessment platform, and it asks them a series of multiple choice questions that's really trying to get at a student's indicative behaviours. So I don't know, let's take collaboration, something we're really comfortable with in schools. A question might be asked of a teacher, in a group task, does the learner A, sit back and do nothing, B, contribute when asked, C, contribute to drive the learning forward, or D, create an inclusive environment where everyone feels like they have something to contribute. So sort of increasing levels of sophistication of that competency, and that's why, we say that teachers who know their kids well have no problem filling out these assessments for their kids. But if you've taught a kid like for 40 minutes once a week for 8 weeks, you probably don't know. We've also always got an option that says D, I don't have the evidence to make a judgment. So they'd just be clicking that, too much.
Interesting. And so you were very upfront. You started kind of a relationship with the Council of International Schools, with schools that are associated with them. But most of your work currently is in the public sector. Is that correct, in Australia? Or are you working also internationally in the public sector?
We work in lots of different places. So we've got lots of work in the public and private and Catholic sectors in Australia. We've got a big project with the Department of Education in the Philippines. We've done work in Saudi Arabia. We've done work in Scotland, international schools now, lots of different contexts. We sort of, work in these bounded projects, I guess. And then being that social purpose initiative, when schools or departments or whatever it is say, okay, thank you, that was great, see you later, then we stop working in that context. So but yeah, our ongoing ones at the moment are pretty widespread.
Fantastic. So when AI came out, ChatGPT, there was like the panic in the city hall with assessment. And Dan and I have talked about, you have the anecdote, Dan, of your nephew saying it's a godsend for his essays, etc. How are you positioning yourself in that assessment conversation where there's a lot of, people are saying you need to reevaluate assessment? Has this been a really almost a blessing in disguise, where now your conversation resonates much more because we have these opportunities that children can engage with using ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and they're using it, and maybe more as a transactional to get answers than really do some critical thinking? How have you reacted to this, and where do you position yourself?
Yeah, it's been an accelerator, AI, really, hasn't it, in lots of different ways. I was actually, as I was, getting in the headspace for our chat today, I listened to, I don't know if it'll be the most recent episode when this comes out, but a recent episode of yours with Rachel and Rita from...
That came out last Saturday, yeah.
It was a really fantastic conversation. So I really liked that, and I really liked how, their organisation also really centred, the ethics and implications of AI, not just sort of the potential benefits and everything. So I would just, quick plug to go and listen to that episode if people haven't caught up on that one yet. It was really, really great. But look, at Melbourne Metrics, I think you could sum up our attitude towards AI as optimistic but underwhelmed. If you're talking about the role of AI in traditional assessments, I mean, it's amazing. AI can assess students' basic skills and content knowledge and content-specific skills exponentially faster than a human rater, and probably more accurately too. Although, this will depend on how the AI is trained and the biases built into all of that. So, tell your teachers that extra pocket money that comes from marking IB exams over June is going to be a thing of the past pretty quickly, I reckon. I think exam boards like the IB will probably start using AI for quality checks on human grading pretty quickly. And then as all of our comfort levels get okay with the role of AI in assessment, I reckon that will swap to AI doing the assessing and then the human in the system to do the quality checks pretty quickly. So look, we're optimistic that AI can help speed up these traditional forms of assessment. And we're also really optimistic that it continue to relieve some of the administrative burden on all of our roles. We certainly use it a lot at the University of Melbourne, but for procedural and administrative things and large scale data crunching and chatbots and stuff like that, Look, we've experimented with using AI to produce judgments of competence. And wouldn't it be amazing if it was good at it? But this is where we've been really underwhelmed. I think there's a pervasive view by some technologists and some people in schools that, it's not the AI that's underwhelming, it's what you're feeding into it. So, there's this view of if we just give the AI enough data, it will do great things for us. And we see this approach play out in the idea of if we just fed more and better data into the AI, like, some of our schools are uploading extensive portfolios or recording student behaviour during class and uploading it to AI. And but we always say the competence is in the kid, not in the artifacts. So even, portfolios of work are not capturing how competent a kid is.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
So the overwhelmingness is interesting. So you think there is a bit of a hype around it and people are misunderstanding what its role is?
Like hype for sure, and I love a bit of hype. I would love to buy into the hype and see all these great outcomes. We just haven't seen it yet. And we keep experimenting, we keep exploring. We have some fantastic AI experts at Melbourne Uni that we get to tap into and we get to advise us on things. We just haven't seen we haven't seen the benefits that have been promised necessarily from it. But I think the other thing it's done to our work is I think people are recognizing that in this world of AI, maybe that how our system has privileged knowledge in the past, maybe that's a little not fit for purpose anymore. So, and again, we are pro content. We think kids still need to know stuff because, of course, you got to know stuff to do stuff. You can't be a good communicator if you've got nothing to say. But we think it's pointing out that kids need to be able to do things beyond just memorizing things. I think it's Andreas Schleicher, I think at the OEDC, that said in once that, education's got to be focused on producing first-class humans, not second-class robots. I think, that pretty much aligns with our view of why competencies are so important alongside the content measures that we've got at the moment.
I think that quote that you shared, which is wonderful, is so important because, there is some research coming out and various pundits are talking about how people aren't thinking, are basically shifting their thinking out to these large language models. And there's even some research where they had different groups of students do work with AI and without AI and how they were able to actually learn and remember. And there's growing evidence that, the more you cognitively offload to these large language models, often you're doing far less thinking yourself. And that's I think, the quote saying that we need to have, thoughtful, ethical humans. I think that's so important. The one group that, is often at the mercy of assessment is the students. And, everybody talks about agency and student agency, but generally, I'm not sure how much input and voice kids have in assessments. What are you doing to amplify that and the importance of having that kind of more collaborative approach where students have a place at the table and also a voice that is listened to and responded to?
Look, I think that's such a great question, and we really centre and privilege agency in our model. My boss Sandra, she likes the terminology that agency is the queen of all competencies. I like the Lord of the Rings analogy a bit myself, like one rule them all. Like agency is a bit like the one competency to rule them all. So we do elevate agency a bit above the other competencies. And if schools are starting out, and just want to focus on one competency, we always suggest agency, because if you have kids exercising their agency and learning, they'll incidentally be developing their quality thinking, their communication, their collaboration muscles as well. Agency kind of brings all the other competencies along for the ride. It's a bit like a cheat code or something, If you focus on agency, you get all these bonus competencies for the price of one. Well, it's mixing metaphors a bit there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the thing we're trying to push for with agency is agency. If you focus on agency, it's really a shift in mindset from kids being the consumers of teaching and instead thinking of them as the producers of their own learning. So, when they can do that, when they have the competence and confidence to master, whatever comes in their door or comes their way, that's when you start to see things really take off. I think it's Dylan William, I think, that famously said that schools are places where kids go to watch adults work. We need to
I love that.
Doing their own thinking and their own doing and their own creating and their own performing. And teachers should not be working harder than the kids.
Why are we, we talk about agency, but actually, once you give agency I work in a primary setting, and, agency can be pretty messy when you have a group of kindergartners and you say, do whatever you want, which of course we don't, but, you want to build the capacity to have agency. Why do you think schools are comfortable having that as part of their mission and having that dialogue, but actually not enacting it?
I think because it's really hard, John. It's really hard to do. Well, it's very easy to read a paragraph and then sort of, regurgitate that back to kids and then tell them, right, now you've got to memorize it and regurgitate it back to me on a page. That's much easier than, and I also like how, you pointed out that giving kids agency is not just a free-for-all saying, all right, kids, it's project time, see you in a month. That's not agency as well, but this is the professionalism of teachers to, follow an inquiry cycle or start to see their students as authentic partners of co-design in their learning journeys. And I get, if you're coming from a very traditional or didactic approach to teaching, it can be a real sort of affront or threat to your professional identity and challenge maybe, what you think good teaching and learning is. But it can also incredibly freeing as well.
Yeah.
So and the other thing is that it's nothing new, Maria Montessori was writing about this 100 years ago. We all learned about Vygotsky and the ZPD in our teacher training courses, and what's that Dewey quote? School is not about life, school is life. So I think it's those reminders that we've got this time with young people, and it's our role to curate or facilitate these deep learning experiences and be that guide along the side or facilitator to help them really, on their own path.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things that we know is all these exams that students are doing is because often they want to go to universities. And I know for my own two children that went to universities, their grades were quite important where they ended up. Not that they were in the mindset of, but definitely, when they applied, they were like, what were your grades? That was apart from the essay and the interview. What are you doing to, if you're working in K through 12 schools and, not getting rid of grades, but changing the way grades look and the way we come up with grades, what is your relationship with universities and how is that conversation going?
That's such a great question, because I think that transition point, you know, from senior secondary into tertiary pathways, it's really, you know, the bottleneck that's stifling innovation and creativity in the rest of the K through 12 sector, you know, because you've got DP teachers saying, you know, oh, I've got to quickly get through all this content and I've got to finish in March so I can spend April to prep so my kids are ready for the exam in May. And, you know, and then you've got people saying, well, if they've got to write essays on their exam in May, it's, you know, we need more than 2 years practice. We should start teaching how to write a great essay, you know, down in 7th grade or 8th grade or something, you know, and before you know it, you've got kindergarten kids going off to tutoring or something. So it is, we are really focused on that grade 12 to university transition point, because we see that just as, if we can crack that, you know, we think we're going to just open up all the wonders that education could and should be. So what we're doing about that is we've actually just won a highly competitive grant here in Australia, and it, you know, it's great, came with some money, but more importantly, it came with a lot of sort of prestige and recognition in the research community. And it's our project's called Matching for Success. So we've sort of been looking for a couple of years now into this idea that maybe there's a better way than just giving kids one number, ranking kids on that one number, and then, you know, if you get a high number, you get access to all the courses. If you get a middle number, you get whatever's left over, and if you get a low number, well, you know, this is the pathway that's left for you, type of thing. So the project we've got is about matching, a matching mechanism. So the idea is that we're working with schools who are assessing their kids, but that's only half the picture. So the other half of the picture is that universities and the university sectors, that while the schools are assessing the kids, and I should also maybe just take a moment to say that we see kids and people as being jagged or spiky, that their competency profiles all look different. So some kids are really high on some competencies and low on others. You know, no kid is good at nothing, and no kid is good at everything. You know, humans are spiky. So while the schools are doing this assessing, we're asking universities, and this is why we're so excited to be working with CIS, because they have, you know, not only their 1,000 schools, but their 600 university members, to go out and profile their courses. You know, so what does it take to be a successful engineering student at University X? And what does it take to be a successful nursing student at University Y? You know, and we know that the same course, I don't know, let's say architecture, can be delivered in a really, you know, a really different way at different universities. So one course might be a really theoretical course, and one might be a very applied course. And that will take a different competency profile to be a successful architecture student at those two different universities. And wouldn't that be good info for kids to know when they're deciding where to apply? So the idea is that you're looking for matching data to inform university entrance decisions, rather than just that blunt ranking tool.
Yeah, that's great. That's really, I mean, I think that's such a nice way, because then so often kids sometimes don't go to certain places because of the grades, where they maybe have the competencies to be able to be part of that course or that university. That's fantastic. Ellen, we're coming to an end of a wonderful conversation, and this has just been so interesting. One thing we always, Dan, I don't know if you have any questions or this, as you hear this and you have 2 children beginning their journey in the world of assessment, any reactions or thoughts?
No, this has been an episode for me of really just learning. This has been great. You know, I just, I've, you know, again, you know, I'm really, in terms of my own children, I'm just not sure. I'd like to shield them from it as long as possible and get them to be creative and not focused on that, you know, but, you know, they're in the international school system, so they're heading towards the DP if they stay where they are. So it's going to happen eventually.
Yeah. But, you know, if we could assess their creativity and measure that and value that alongside, you know, the DP.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that would be amazing. Yeah, for sure. Really a lot for me to think about from this call.
Ellen, we always ask our guests to share kind of, you know, just something you want to share with the audience, and that's the educator, so that's school leaders and teachers, and then also to the students. Just 2 things you want people to walk away with that maybe they want to continue to think about. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, look, in the international school context, one thing I'll say maybe is that, you know, our relationship with CIS has been extremely fruitful and enlightening for us at Melbourne Metrics. So if you're an international school and you're not a CIS school, I would highly recommend you go check them out. Sometimes you work with people or organizations and, and when you start to get under the skin, you find out they're a bit of a one-trick pony, or they're a bit shiny on the surface, but then lack a bit of substance underneath. Well, we've just found CIS to be whatever the opposite of that is. And we just learn so much from their expertise across such a huge range of things in the international school world, and their integrity as an organisation has just been amazing. So we're extremely fortunate to be partnering with them on the New Metrics International School Program. And if schools want to find out more about that program, you can find it on our website at Melbourne Metrics or through their CIS member portal.
And our show notes. We have Ellen's done a lovely job of sharing a lot of links, so definitely a lot to dig into there. And for students.
For students, something I would say is that I might share words from my favourite educationalist, I think. Kurt Hahn was he set up a school in Salem. He is the founder of the Outward Bound Network.
Sure.
Done a lot of
in Scotland.
Yeah, a lot of fantastic work, and so he's really influenced me as an educator a lot. And my favourite quote of his, I think he says, "There is more in you than you think." And I just think that, the type of learning that we're advocating for is where kids are pushed into situations where when they're finished with it or they come out the other side, they're like, "Oh, wow, I didn't know I could do that, or I didn't know I had that in me." So I think I say to young people, I reckon there's more in you than you think. And I hope your teachers are working hard to bring that out of you. But also that you have the agency to dig deep and pull it out of you yourself as well.
Thank you. Thank you for those wonderful words. And Ellen is at Melbourne Metrics at the University of Melbourne, and do go to the show notes. You can find all kinds of information, and I'm sure if you reach out to her, she'd be very happy to engage and share some of the work that they're doing. We want to make a big thank you out to all those people that are following us on LinkedIn. We're over 1,000 of you are faithful, and we really appreciate that. And also our listeners that keep supporting us, sharing comments, and are always there to give suggestions. So LinkedIn is, of course, the place that we tend to communicate and share stuff. So you can go into our LinkedIn group and have a chat, or just share some thoughts, or anything that might help us make sure the kind of guests that we're bringing of the caliber of Ellen can keep coming back. So we really appreciate your support. Ellen, wishing you all the best, and we'll definitely keep in touch, because I don't think the assessment journey is over, and there's a lot to work to be done, and especially where you have large language models, and now this agentic AI and Google Classroom and Toddle, and it's just seeping in everywhere. Dan, don't you feel like now you can't open anything out without AI?
Yeah, in terms of, if you look at AbcView, my company, I'd say we went from 0 AI 2 years ago to now it's probably 60-70% of what I do with schools is AI.
Wow.
It's that transformative. We're an AI company now.
That's amazing. In just 2
Google,
years.
Google's AI solution. So yeah, it's huge, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you to our audience. Dan, lovely to catch up. And Ellen, all the best. We look forward to catching up with you at our next episode. Thank you so much from the International Schools Podcast.